Why do millions of men still line up for marriage, even though the odds are stacked against them? Why do men keep signing that paper, even though marriage can drain your finances, crush your freedom, and destroy your illusions about love? And why is it that after 10, Archer, even 30 years, so many walk away broke, bitter, and broken? Today, I'm giving it to you straight. 10 brutal truths. The hidden dangers of marriage that most men never see coming. If you're thinking about marriage, if you're already divorced and paying alimony, if you've ever fought for child custody in family court, this message is for you. Stick around, because truth number 9 will show you exactly how the power shift happens. And once you see it, you'll never look at marriage the same way again. Here's what you'll get today. 10 clear reasons I'll never get married again. Real stories from my own life. Simple metaphors that stick. A final message on how to live with autonomy, authenticity, and freedom without signing your rights away. If one of these truths hits home, drop a comment below. Say it with me. Stay single. Let's begin. Reason 1: keep the government out. The number 1 reason I'll never marry again? The family court system. If you've been through divorce, you know, the courts rarely play fair. Men usually get the short end of the stick. You can lose your house. You can lose access to your kids, and you can end up paying alimony for years, sometimes for life. Here's the harsh truth. You can spend decades building a fortune and watch half of it vanish overnight with a judge's signature. Nothing feels worse than standing in front of a system that has complete control over your future, financially, emotionally, and even spiritually, and realizing you don't get a vote. Getting married without understanding the law is like driving full speed down a mountain in heavy fog. By the time you see the cliff, it's already too late. So my first truth is this: keep the government out of your love life, because once they're in, you're no longer in control. If you've ever been burned in family court, drop a in the comments so other men know they're not alone. Reason 2: the validation trap. When I was younger, I thought marriage meant legitimacy. Society tells us, get married, and you're a real man. You're stable. You're respectable. You're worthy. But here's the trap. You don't just need validation once. You'll be chasing it every single day. Every day. You'll need her approval. Every day. You'll need to measure up to her expectations. And no matter how much you give, the bar keeps moving. That's not love. That's slavery to validation. Marriage's validation is like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. No matter how much you give, you'll always have to pour more. And the cost? Your freedom, your authenticity, your ability to live life on your own terms. That's why I call it the validation trap. You're trading your birthright, freedom, for society's stamp of approval. If you've ever felt like you had to prove yourself every single day in a relationship, comment, validation trap. Reason 3: king of your castle. For the first time in 30 years, I finally live in a home that feels like mine. Back then, it was always her house. The decorations, the furniture, the smell, the dollhouse rooms I couldn't even walk into. It might sound small, but over time, it wears you down. You wake up every day feeling like a guest in your own life. Now, it's different. My dogs sleep in my bed. I eat when I want. What I want. There's no dinner time. No. Rules of the house. The television shows. The music. The vibe. All chosen by me. And the feeling? Liberating. The day you take back the keys to your own house is the day you take back the keys to your identity. Truth number 3 is simple. Be the king of your castle, not a guest in someone else's. If you know what I mean, type king in the comments. Reason 4: commitment capital. Here's the truth nobody talks about. Commitment is expensive, not just in money, but in energy, in focus, in life force. When you commit to a woman in marriage, you don't just commit your heart. You commit your time, your bank account, your future. I was married for 22 years. We raised 3 kids together. And the day she walked out, I was broke. I didn't have enough in my bank account to cover the next month's rent. That's how empty I was. Fast forward 6 years. With no marriage draining my resources, I've rebuilt. I'm not wealthy, but I'm comfortable. I'm no longer living paycheck to paycheck. And I finally feel the power to live the life I want. On my own terms. That's what I mean by commitment capital. Every man has a limited reserve. You can pour it into your wife's priorities, or you can pour it into building the life you were meant to live. It's like filling a shared tank where she controls the valve. When it's empty, you're the one stranded. Truth number 4. Be careful where you spend your capital. If you've ever hit financial rock bottom after a breakup or divorce, drop rock bottom in the comments. Reason 5. Self-reliance is gold. Partnership sounds like cinquante. Sometimes people say sunt. But in reality, most of the time, you'll feel like you're carrying 80, 90, even 100%. And when you're relying on someone else to do their part, but they don't, guess who picks up the slack? You. That's how resentment builds. That's how men burn out. Not from the load itself, but from carrying more than they ever signed up for. When you live single, there's no illusion of shared responsibility. If something gets done, you did it. If it doesn't, it's on you. And that clarity is gold. Marriage is like pushing a car up a hill with 2 people on the team. But one stops pushing, and you're left straining alone, wondering why your back is breaking. Truth number 5. Self-reliance beats false partnership every time. If you've ever felt like you were carrying the whole load alone, comment with a brick emoji. Reason 6. Social freedom. Here's something men rarely admit out loud. Marriage shrinks your social circle. Why? Because every friend you have has to pass her test. This guy drinks too much. And so, that one smokes weed. And so, she's too much drama. And so, little by little, your contact list gets pruned. Not by you, by her. And after years, you look around and realize you've lost some of the best friendships of your life. Not because they betrayed you, not because they hurt you, but because they didn't pass her filter. Now, I don't have that problem. My friends are my friends. I choose who stays, who goes, and I'll never again hand that power to someone else. It's like giving someone else the password to your phone and letting them delete your contacts one by one, until one day, you look down and your world feels empty. Truth number 6. Guard your social freedom. Friendship is too valuable to outsource. Tag an old friend you'd love to reconnect with. Let's see who still matters. Reason 7. Entertainment and lifestyle. This one might sound small, but it matters more than you think. Your hobbies, your passions, your adventures, they don't always survive marriage. Take me. For example, I grew up camping. I loved the woods, the smell of a campfire, the quiet mornings outdoors. But my ex-wife, she hated camping. So guess what? For decades, I didn't camp. That whole part of my life was put on mute. Now, I'm free again. I'm looking at buying a trailer, loading up my big dogs, and driving across the country. That dream was impossible before. Now it's just a decision away. Marriage is like letting someone else hold the remote to your life's playlist. They mute half the songs you love, and you don't even realize how much you've lost until the silence sets in. Truth number 7. Live your lifestyle. Don't let marriage mute it. If you'd hit the road tomorrow with nothing but a tent, a truck, and some dogs, drop a fire emoji in the comments. Reason 8. Autonomy. Authenticity. Freedom. Let's be clear. I'm not against women. I'm not against relationships. What I am against is signing a legal contract that strips away autonomy, authenticity, and freedom. Relationships can be beautiful. Love can be powerful. But once you add the legal layer of marriage, the dynamic changes. What was once voluntary affection becomes an obligation enforced by law. The truth? You can have almost every benefit of being with a woman: companionship, love, intimacy, without entangling yourself in a system that can destroy you. It's like swimming together in a clear lake. That's freedom. But marriage is chaining your ankles together before diving in. The water might be nice, but the chain will drown you. Truth number 8. You don't need marriage to have love, but you do need freedom to have yourself. If you believe in relationships without legal entanglements, comment freedom. To reason. 9. The marriage power shift. Here's a brutal one. The moment you marry, the power dynamics change. At first, you won't notice, but over time, she will realize something. If the marriage fails, the system has her back. And that realization shifts everything. It becomes her plan B, her safety net, her weapon of last resort. If you don't measure up to her idea of the perfect husband, if you step out of line in any way, she knows the courts will take care of her at your expense. Not all women abuse this, but enough do that. It's a systemic risk. And that risk falls squarely on you. It's like playing chess while your opponent secretly holds an ace card. You think you're playing fair, but the moment things go bad, she slams it on the table, and the game ends with you in checkmate. Truth number 9. Marriage tilts the board, and you're not the one holding the aces. If you've ever felt that power shift, drop a P in the comments. Reason 10. The illusion of romantic love. This one's tough to swallow. Most of us grew up on illusions. Movies, social media, fairy tales. We were told marriage is romance, that happily ever after is real. But marriage is not a romance novel. It's a daily slog. Bills, responsibilities, arguments, compromises. Sure, there are moments of affection, but mostly, it's work. And most men have no idea what they're signing up for. When reality hits, they feel blindsided, disillusioned, and often financially destroyed. It's like buying a luxury car because of the commercial, only to realize it breaks down every week. And you're stuck with the payments for life. Truth number 10. Romantic illusions sell you the dream, but marriage makes you pay for the nightmare. If you've ever woken up from that illusion, comment, illusion. Let's recap the 10 brutal truths. E. Family court can strip your finances and kids. R. Validation trap trades freedom for approval. San. Be the king of your castle, not a guest. Su. Commitment capital is limited. Spend it wisely. Woo. Self-reliance beats false partnership. Lu. Guard your social freedom. Friends are priceless. C. Don't let marriage mute your lifestyle. Ba. Protect your autonomy. Authenticity. Freedom. Do. The power shift tilts the board against you. Sure, romantic love is often just an illusion. I spent 22 years married. We raised 3 kids. And when it ended, I was standing at 0. Since then, I've rebuilt. Step by step. Brick by brick. Not with illusions, but with clarity. What did I lose? The fantasy. What did I gain? The truth. And a life that belongs to me. I'm not anti-love. I'm not anti-woman. But I am anti-contract that destroys men. You can love. You can build relationships. You can share your life, but you don't have to sign away your freedom. If you ever choose marriage, go in with open eyes. Know the risks. Protect your assets. Protect your role as a father. And understand the cost. But if you're like me, if you value freedom, autonomy, authenticity, then the choice is simple. Stay healthy. Stay strong. Stay single. Like and subscribe for more brutal truths. Please share this video with a friend who needs to hear it. And comment, stay single, so the algorithm knows we're not alone. E. If you had to choose only one autonomy, authenticity, or freedom, which would it be? R. When do you think the power shift in marriage really begins? Sen. Do you believe in relationships without legal entanglements? Why or why not? I'll be in the comments. Let's talk.